Hello and welcome back from the networking break. This is Tom Bechtold, of course, your host for today's AI virtual conference. Up next, a good friend of mine out of Texas, we've got Kimberly Haywood up. She's going to talk to us about a bunch of stuff, right, on AI governance. It's a balancing act. Data, AI, and cybersecurity. Now, we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I want to say thank you to Kimberly for being here and thanking her organization, Nomad Cyber Concepts, for allowing her to be here, right? So thank you, thank you, thank you. It's wonderful to have you back on the events again, KJ. I'm looking forward to your session. I'm going to let you just kind of take the reins and go with it. I'll regroup with you later on, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Tom, for having me back at the Secure World Virtual Conference. I'm really excited to be here. Okay, so let's dive into things here. Why don't we start basically with the risk, the basics of a refresh. Let's refresh. The image that you see where it says acceptable and not acceptable, that image is really on one side of the spectrum of acceptable risk. The other side of the spectrum, of course, is not acceptable risk. So what does that mean? So on the first side of the spectrum, which should be on your left-hand side, it's going to really cover the increased cost of support agreements for outdated software applications. That's your financial impact, right? In the center is really the limited cybersecurity capabilities to prevent data loss. That's your reputation impact. And then the far left, the not acceptable, would be on the spectrum would be poor quality of research projects, poor funding, which obviously impacts your funding, I should say. So poor quality of research, which impacts your funding. That also can be a reputational impact as well as a financial impact. So if we dive into ISACA's definition of risk under the 3 pillars, which is the risk appetite, the tolerance, and the risk capacity, the first area of risk appetite, it's really a broad-based amount of risk an enterprise or any other organization is willing to accept as they're pursuing their mission and their objectives. So I'm sure most of you are aware, the board, your senior management, they're responsible for setting and sharing the company's risk tolerance. You know that, right? So to begin defining the risk tolerance, they must consider aspects like a company culture, capabilities, availabilities, financial stability, and most importantly for the board is the competitive edge, right? Where are you standing in the marketplace? The second pillar is risk tolerance. So that's really related to the acceptable range relevant to the achievements given the objectives. What's best qualifies the same unit of measurement as the related objective. So risk capacity is the objective magnitude or the amount of loss. So that objective is really focused on what an enterprise can tolerate without risking any continued impacts, right? It's that level of risk tolerance that gives you that baseline. So that's really where you kind of want to be. Again, you can always identify this through ISACA or other organizations that focus on governance, risk, and compliance frameworks. Basic capacity, risk tolerance, your risk appetite, your tolerance, and your capability, your capacity. So to really kind of sum this up, the risk appetite, risk tolerance, and capacity really are distinct terms in themselves, so they have to be parsed out as a governance practitioner, security practitioner, but they are linked and they do have mutually enforceable ranges. And additionally, those unacceptable risks which can be applied to the risk assessment, is really how you want to identify that for reporting and governance processes. So let's turn to the NIST AI RFM, and that's the 1.0 framework. Many of you have probably heard that it's already been established. And those have basically 3 core risk areas of concerns: people, organizations, and the ecosystem. And what do I mean by that? So let's turn to the next slide. And it's going to basically break down what that means. Harm to people, and that's individual harm to a person, civil liberties, rights, physical, group, community, harm to groups or discriminations of a particular population, our societal harms, and that could be relating to educational harms or democratic participation. And I don't mean necessarily political. I'm talking about actually a democracy and how that can actually affect or hurt our society. Harms to an organization. Many of you probably know this off the top of your head. The business operations, right? Harm to an organization from security breaches and monetary loss. Harm to an organization's reputation. And then finally, harms to an ecosystem. Harms that interconnect and independent elements of the sources, and harms to the global financial systems, just covered that, right, with SACAs, the supply chain, and any other interrelated systems within your organization. Harms to natural resources, water, food, how we live in our planet, right? We rely on sources in farming, we rely on sources of transportation for our food to move from one area to another. So that area is the focus for the NIST RFM, right? Their core focus is really back to the people, organizations, and the ecosystems. That's their area of concern. So if we go further and we look at the AI risk management framework. Now, this framework is developed by NIST. This is the NIST AI risk framework. So any one of you can get this, and I have resources at the end of my presentation. So let's start with the mapping. So basically this framework outlines 4 key functions for managing AI risk. The first area is to govern. That's the center, the core that you see here. Involves setting policies and defining roles. Map, which measures understanding the AI system's context, purpose, and the impacts. And it focuses on assessing the performance, fairness, and security while managing, while the management part is about applying the controls to address the risk to ensure compliance. So you have these core areas, these 4 areas here. You have govern, map, measure, and manage. So let's, for an example, I'm going to kind of give you more of a live, just say use case for example. So let's take a healthcare organization that's developing an AI system to assist in diagnosing a disease or an imaging, right? Medical images to ensure that that system is safe, fair, effective. They have to decide to implement the NIST AI framework to cover this, right? They're sort of looking at the NIST framework to assess how will they use this particular framework so they can make that assessment as they're developing this AI system. The first area of governance in this step in the process is that you want to establish a governance team. There are many different subject matter or institutes that are talking about these steps as well. And this is a good business practice. So you want to start by governing, which is establishing a team, define the policies and procedures of the security and any other ethical AI use, assign the roles and responsibilities for the risk management. 2, you want to map. You want to identify the system's purpose, assisting doctors in diagnosing the disease. So you want to get your subject matter experts in there. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you guys can see this. So I want to make sure you can see the slide. And you also want to analyze the data sources. You want to make sure that that data is clean. You want to ensure that there is minimal biases as possible in that data. And particularly when you're talking about patients' records and medical diagnosis, because when we do have those situations where you're developing a system, obviously not all data is good data. We all know that as professionals. Consider the legal and ethical implications. So you want, sometimes if you can, you want to bring in your CPOs, your chief privacy officers, or someone on your legal team to be a part of this team. And three, can't count today, measure. You want to assess the system's performance and using metrics like accuracy, sensibility, the sensitivity and the specificity of assessing the performance. You want to evaluate the fairness and biases for the training model, because you're going to have to train the model. You're going to have to ensure that the model is trained on appropriate outputs, that it's giving you the outputs that you need it to give. Again, this is talking about our use case to assess. You want to consider you want to ensure that there's transparency by documenting the entire AI model decision-making process. Everything in the governance space, many of you probably know this, is documenting, right? So these frameworks are just a guide. So the NIST AI risk management framework is really going to be your guideline to this. Managing is the fourth step. And of course, that includes, managing and implementing the controls to mitigate the risk, monitoring, and it also includes updating the model and the processes based upon the feedback. Really key, what I'm saying here is that when you design models, particularly for healthcare systems or any type of high level sensitive data, you want to ensure that that data is constantly monitored and it's updated, because things change. And with the healthcare industry, they're talking about people and their bodies and their diagnosis, and that could change based upon new medications, that could be changed based upon treatments. So you want to make certain that the model has a process based upon feedback as well. You want to have a feedback loop regarding how is the model doing, right? And providing insurance that regulatory compliance. Also, you're using that as a guideline so that, you make sure that your processes are being ethically developed and you're looking at a model that is being ethically developed and you are adhering to government regulations. And that's just an idea. The outcome of the RFM NIST in the healthcare space for the use case I just mentioned, you want to assure that the AI system is reliable and fair. I mentioned that, or I can't say that enough. You want to ensure that it's compliant with the regulations. I mentioned that a few seconds ago. And ultimately, you want to improve the patient care. That's your outcome. What's your outcome? I want to improve the patient care. And I want to ensure that I use my AI-driven model and tools to help me make better decisions. So that's just an example of how you can use this particular model. Let's move forward. So these are the core risk areas that I've identified as it relates to AI developments in our space. Algorithmic bias, I touched on it just a little bit there. And that is something we want to make sure that algorithmic biases, basically, we want to make sure that it does not pose significant dangers to our society, to our businesses, to our infrastructure, meaning economic infrastructure. These biases, we all know, can be implicit and explicit, but they're also ingrained in all of us. And we're all human. Although we're the drivers, and I've said this in many of my other presentations, we're the drivers when it comes to AI innovation and AI use. While biases really will never disappear, and we know that, we have still the power and the control of its impact and all the outcomes of it. So that's what it does for us, right? We have the full control over how it's going to impact us and what those outcomes are. The privacy aspect of this is when we're employing an AI system for any type of task, we want to assure that it's important that we guarantee its precision, fairness, and commitment to upholding the privacy of sensitive data, of IP, intellectual property, of PHI, personal health identifiable information, PII, we want to make certain, and that's PII, personal identifiable information, or PHI, health information, PHI, personal health information. So we want to make sure that we're upholding that privacy aspects of that data. Really, really critical, especially when you're addressing an audience, meaning the output is a model that you want to use. And the audience in general, many individuals within your ecosystem, whether it be clients or whether it be patients or whether it be third-party vendors, they're really not familiar with the technicalities of the systems or the tools that you're designing. They're might be familiar with the usage. So from a UX experience, they have that, right? They understand as a user what their experience is. I've mentioned this before, but privacy is not about protecting the data sometimes. It also involves addressing potential harms to the company or the institution. Reputation, cultural, economic, political, legal, regulatory. You want to ensure that your privacy is more than just. So if you're going to do the layers of this. The fourth element, which is third-party risk. I've discussed this many times before, which is that the third-party risk element really needs to be focused on the data, the software, the hardware itself, the risk metrics or methodologies used by the organizations developing the AI systems may not always align with the risk metrics or methodologies used by the organization. So that's deploying the AI system. So it's important that when you're looking at securing a new model that has been designed by a third party, let's say you are a larger Fortune 500 company and you're considering that use, there's still risks that are associated with the third-party software design and data. And how are they doing that? How are they storing that data? How are they actually assessing the data? Are they cleansing the data? So there's so many different facets when you're dealing with third-party risk. The fourth area is basically the risk at different stages of the AI lifecycle. We just covered the AI lifecycle, right, from the NIST RMF framework. So part of that is looking at the results and how they're differ from what's obtained later in the process. And some risks aren't always visible, initially, right? But they can merge and they can grow over time as the AI system evolves, like any other application. Many of you are security professionals. You've seen this in your careers. Also, stakeholders have a really important role in this, and there are varying perspectives on the developments. They also may see at risk. They may miss how the system should be deployed, actually, or identify really how do we want to use this. So it is important for all stakeholders to collaborate in designing, developing a trustworthy AI system. And when I say all, we talked about the team earlier. We're talking about InfoSec. We're talking about your CTOs, your CIOs. We're talking about your CPOs. You want to involve, and even your developers, of course, your product teams, your sales teams. You want to involve someone from each facet of your enterprise in order to ensure that you're looking at this from a larger holistic perspective so that you can gain better insights on what risk is the organization willing to assume as we are developing, or we're deploying, as we are purchasing or assessing, an AI system for use in your organization. There is a fourth that's not on here, and that's the trustworthiness of AI characteristics. And I'll quickly skim over those. And that's validate, be reliable, be safe and secure, resilience, accountability, be transparent, explain. Transparency is very important with AI developments. Privacy, you want to be privacy focused, and you want to be as fair as possible from a human perspective, but also to ensure that there's fairness so that there is no harmful biased data that is placed in your system, or not necessarily placed, but even something that you're purchasing, right? You want to ask really good questions. So let's move on. And this is my favorite. The framing of AI, the life cycle. So the life cycle here really is going to really cover the effective risk management that everyone has to be involved in. I'm saying that over and over again because I'm hoping that you're hearing it. The AI, RFM, there's dimensions that need input from people from different backgrounds and fields and experiences. And that's what I was speaking about a few moments ago. The more diverse your teams are, the more ideas that you can receive from those, from that information, right? The more diverse you have of a team, the more shared information, the better equipped you're going to be as a leader, as an organization, by clarifying what the purpose and the function of that particular technology tool is going to do for you. AI systems, applications development. It falls all within the same range. You want to be due diligent in that. So the life cycle, of course, begins with the planning and design phase. You can see that here. And it really covers well, let's start here. Let's start with the key dimensions. So let's go on the core. So the key dimensions here, the application context, the data input, the AI model, and the task and the output, right? So many of you have probably done your own homework and you're familiar with the basic AI life cycle. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the SSDLC process as well as the SDLC process for application design and development. That measurement concept and methodology is not very much different as it relates to AI models designing, right? So the planning and the design phase is going to be a part of the context. Within the application context, you have the plan and design phase, and you have the operate and monitor phase. So here, within here, the application context, you have plan and design, and then operate and monitor. When we step over into the data input, we have collect and process data. So that's your input data. That's the data that would actually be ingested into the model. So, of course, we're talking about testing for those of you who've done models designs before. So the next area is the AI model itself, right? You want to verify, validate, as you're building the model for its outcome, for its use, for its purpose. And the next area of this life cycle is the task and the output, of course. So you want to deploy it and you want to use it. But the areas that we covered earlier with the framework, this is the area that we want to talk about as it relates to doing your due diligence, understanding what is your pain point, what is the goal, what is the objective, what is the purpose and use, and how are we using this data, And again, that monitoring process of that data, right? It has to be constantly monitored because information changes. So those are the basic areas. And then we have, of course, the application context. We talked about that. And that's the operate and monitor phase. We don't want to forget people and planet, which is right in our center core, right? It's us. It's our planet. It's our ecosystem, environmental systems. So we want to make sure that we're careful and cautious as we're designing building models. Again, like I said, even if you're not doing that per se, and that's not your domain, you want to be, you want to have a high level of AI acumen so that you as a security professional can ask the right questions, can ask the tough questions as it relates to harm, potential harm or risk to your organization. So let's move to the next slide, which is basically going to cover the data integration challenges. What are our data integration challenges? What's our day-to-day? Well, for one, combining data with various sources, formats, and systems can pose challenges. I'm sure many of you have already experienced that, even with your basic cell phones or mobile devices or your vehicles. So that may include, in this instance, data drifting and algorithmic bias. So what we want to do is make sure that as we're dealing with a primary challenge, we want to ensure that combining the data from different sources and format and the systems, that we prevent data drifting. We prevent algorithmic bias as much as possible. And again, that could be through your risk assessments, because you're in a larger organization, you may not be developing, but you may purchase. If you are in development, you want to ensure that there's some oversight, some governance oversight, right? Some technical oversight to the development of that, ensure that their data drift is not occurring, algorithmic bias is not occurring. And really, what's the relevance here? Is highlighting the key difficulties, integrated in the structure and unstructured and data from multiple sources. That has to be taken in consideration, emphasizing the need for a more high level, more detailed data governance initiative and or practices. So what's the key point here? AI governance must address all data integration and challenges to ensure a real seamless process in the data combination as well as the utilization of it. So data governance takes a huge role in this process. So we're talking about developing teams. You want to ensure that our governance teams are included in that process, of course, right? Because we talked about the policies and procedures in development. So let's move on. So the next slide should be covering the data quality and privacy. So from that aspect, we want to ensure that the data accuracy is important, very important, because that eliminates the data bias. We also want to ensure that there's precise measurements in the recipe for a dish. And I'm using my example because I like to cook. It's kind of like that. It's like using, and I think I put that on my slide if you guys can read it. If you can, I said it's much like needing a precise measurement in a recipe for a dish, right? If the data is flawed, if the ingredients are bad, meaning that you have that item in your cabinet that's been up there since 2022, and you're using that ingredient. And it looks good, it seems okay, and you're going to use that ingredient, but that ingredient is flawed. That ingredient is no good, but you're going to use it anyway because it's still on the shelf. So that's what I mean by that. So the decisions that you have to make when you're assessing the data quality are really important here. And this is where your governance professionals can come in. This is where someone even from outside your organization that provides some oversight that really understands quality, data, measurements, testing, and monitoring, privacy of data. understanding those core areas, that's important to really safeguarding the sensitive data, and sometimes even helpful for unauthorized access, you know, or misuse of that data. Because you really want to ensure that you're designing, again, models that ensure accuracy, good output, good outcomes. It's giving you what you want it to give you. So the primary challenge, ensuring accuracy, completeness is your primary challenge. What's the relevancy? I gave you an example from my personal anecdote, which is cooking, which is that recipe and adding an ingredient in that's flawed. So it's important that you really critical on your precise measurements and ensuring that the data is clean as much as possible. So what's the key point here? Protecting sensitive data and unauthorized access is essential to prevent misuse. Still want to make sure that's kind of that's what you want to hone in on, is the misuse, and ensure only those that have the permission to have access to that data have access to that data. You've already been doing this in your professions as security professionals. You're familiar with a lot of these methodologies, and it's just moving those same methodologies over into this space of model design, model development, right? So it's not very much different here. You have the knowledge and the acumen from your previous experience. So let's move on to the next slide, which is, I'm going to cover, let's see, I'm going to make sure that I didn't overskip here. I think I'm going to go one more slide back, guys. Sorry about that. Data security. I definitely want to go over the data security aspects. That's pretty much combining data from various sources, right? Oh, I'm sorry, no, forget that. That's me talking to you. So the primary challenge for data security implication is, what's the primary challenge here? Safeguarding the data from cyber threats, that's a given, right? Multiple systems and tools. Multiple systems and tools that have the potential for cybersecurity risks. That's the relevancy here. I'm building a model that can minimize that risk, that can minimize my FTE time spent on identifying security risk, identifying and sorting through network traffic and sorting through vulnerabilities. That would be the relevancy here. So the data security implications are really important. It's a really important point here. So strong security measures, again, you know this, strong security measures are needed within an AI governance to protect data integrity and prevent deep breaches. It gives you your baseline of processes and oversight. I guess I'm going to give you an example. I'm trying to think. So if I lock my house just to keep intruders out, I do the best that I can. I have, many different forms of cameras, and I do the best that I can as a frontline, right, user to protect my intellectual property, to protect my environment, to protect my home, to protect my family. So our outliers is that data security involves implementing measures. My measurement is, and I'm sure your measurement is at your home, is that you ensure that you protect your home, physical assets in your home. You ensure that when you have a child, that you are locking that child up into an appropriate seat if they're under a certain weight or they're under a certain age. Protecting your data from hackers and cybersecurity criminals. As security practitioners, this is not new to you. You already know this. You understand this. So it's just a matter of following those, again, practices that you have been implementing, some of you for decades, some of you for the last 5 years, but you have honed in on those baseline skills of how do I ensure that I'm protecting security, data security, and what those implications are. Some of you have already run and gone through the processes of risk assessments. It's not much different, again, as it relates to AI. The difference is our questions are going to be different. So basically saying that if I were designing a AI governance model for your organization, I would lean on the OWASP-NIST frame. I would lean on the OWASP framework guidelines. I would also lean on the NIST RFM as a guideline, particularly if you're U.S.-based companies. Now we have the EU AI Act. I'll get into that later in the slide. But as we're talking about security measures, security practices, best practices for your organization, if your organization has been doing this, you would know because you understand from the practicality of what risk you have minimized over a period of time. Again, taking your existing acumen and repurposing it as you're viewing AI governance in the space of AI development. So regulatory compliance, moving into that. That's basically adhering to the data usage, protection laws, significant challenges, but essential for AI systems. Compliance does ensure ethical use, safeguards, and user privacy. It builds trust in AI technology, because we talked about trustworthiness, right? That's what the NIST RFM, RMF framework covers, right? That trustworthiness, as well as other frameworks that we'll dive into. Organizations must follow those regulatory guidelines to avoid legal risk, to avoid legal penalties, as well as trust from your clients, trust from your consumers, whatever that trust may mean for your organization. That's what you want to basically focus on, right? Maintaining the public confidence, really, really important. That trust is critical. That's why it's built into all of the AI governance frameworks, is trust, because it could be a potential high risk for you. So what's the primary challenge here, regulators? Adhering to the laws is the primary challenge. I'm sure many of you know that. It's hard, especially if you are an organization that is overly regulated, and I say that because I don't work in government, that is overly regulated or that's overly assessed, meaning that you have multiple assessments that you have to run in your organization in terms of audits continuously, just to maintain, to keep your lights on, to maintain those client requirements. So it's a pain. I feel it. I've been there. I know that. And I understand even from my client's perspective. But it's something that's important, again, to minimize as much risk as possible to you, to your clients, and to basically our entire ecosystem. So the relevancy aspect is the compliance and data regulations and ensuring the ethical use of the systems, right? And protecting that privacy. The key point here is you want to adhere to data uses protections laws. That's the key point we want to hone in here. And it's essential to avoid penalties and maintain trust. An example would be traffic flow. To avoid fines, I'm sure all of you on this call, if you've been a driver in your life at some point, you may have already received a ticket from law enforcement in some capacity. So there are fines that are attributed to that, right? If you break a law, if you break a rule, there are fines that are the result of that. Organizations must comply with data regulations too. So there is no difference. And you want that. You want to ensure that your data at a healthcare organization is protected. You're an individual, you're a human. You need services as well. So putting that kind of lens on, is helpful because you have the level of empathy to say, okay, data protection is really super important. Governance is really super important. I don't like having a ticket, but I know I did speed. I know I went over the speed limit. I know I have because I like driving fast. So you want to avoid those legal penalties, which again could be a risk. You could put that in your risk assessment internally. And again, you want to maintain user trust with your customers and with your clients and your consumers consistently. So now we're going to go into the regulatory compliance aspect. What does this mean? The importance of regulatory frameworks, the EU AI Act. I'm going to do a high level overview, so I'm not going to go deep dive into it for the sake of time, but I will be covering the EU AI Act, kind of a quick overview, what that is, and the OECD guidelines, what that is, and the NIST AI RMF. We covered a little bit more into that because I believe a lot of you are going to be based in the US in terms of the companies, I assume so. And if not, then hit me up in the chat and I'll send you out some additional information. The OWASP standards, we're going to, again, cover that a little bit in what areas. And so we want to make sure that you have the essential frameworks and guidelines for developing and or deploying your AI systems. That's the key here. So let's go right into this. So the NIST AI RFM 1.0 framework provides a guideline for AI governance for managing risk. I'm reading the slide because I'm not sure if all of you can see them clearly. Ensuring trustworthy and responsible AI. That's the core of it. So the aspects, the 5 key areas that I have pulled out of this framework as a governance practitioner, security governance practitioner, these are the areas that I've kind of focused in on. And there's going to be basically 5 key areas in each of those frameworks that we're going to cover. So the first part of it, of course, is governance for NIST AI RFM. Governance, data quality, transparency, accountability, and security, and high level, right? I mean, a kind of a robust type security, right? Ensuring that AI systems are resilient and secure enough to fight against malicious attacks. So, and or failures. We want to focus on that as well, or not focus on failures, but definitely we want to ensure that that we're secure in our environment to guard against that. The governance aspect is about really establishing the structure of the processes. And I mentioned this earlier on, policies, procedures, standards internally in your organizations. You definitely want to have those key elements built in your organization. If you are following the NIST AI risk framework, it's a great framework, again, particularly if you're in the US or you're a US-based company, as your guideline. Data quality and integrity. This framework obviously covers that, right? Because it's a NIST framework, ensuring data is used for AI, which is accurate, is relevant, is reliable, it's clean. You want to make sure that all of those aspects of your data quality has the level of integrity that it has. Again, otherwise you're dealing with potential risk or losses from your organization. Transparency. Remember, I mentioned transparency is a part of all of these areas and all of these frameworks. And it just talks about understanding and having data in your organization. Having data within these models. Again, this is asking questions. If you're just doing risk frameworks and you're not building models, you want to include transparency questions for your third-party vendors. If you want them to build the models, or if they say they're going to enhance your model with a large language model implementation. So you want to make certain that you have full transparency into what they're doing and what that process is. What are their practices? How are they doing that? And are they testing the model? Accountability, clearly define the roles and responsibilities of the AI operations. What will that look like in your organization? Who will have access to that? And what level of access is necessary for each user that's going to be using the AI operations, a part of the responsibility of AI operations. So for the EU AI Act at a high level, and I realize none of you guys can see my slide. I apologize. So I'm going to give you a moment to just quickly review that. So the first one we covered, which is the NIST AI RFM. The second is the EU AI Act, and we're going to dive into that. Apologies, I didn't realize you couldn't see that. So the EU AI Act establishes a regulatory framework to ensure the safe and ethical governance of AI systems in the EU, and that's Europe. So the risk classification categorizes AI systems based on risk level: acceptable, high, limited, and minimal. That is actually what the EU AI Act covers. They're focused on, and remember I mentioned to you that I pulled out the 5 core, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I pulled out the 5 core because risk classification is really important, especially if you're working in the space of security, right, governance, and you're doing best practices. Risk classification is really critical. The compliance requirements are also another, so that's the second. Third is market surveillance. Fourth is transparency, the obligation of transparency, and your obligation to be transparent. And they're basically stating that that's informing the users, whoever those users are, when they interact with AI systems, especially in high-risk scenarios, i.e., e.g., healthcare. Human oversight, ensuring human intervention and decision-making in AI operations. The compliance requirements, that's a no-brainer. The market surveillance, monitoring, enforcing compliance of AI systems in the marketplace. And that is what the EU AI Act covers. Again, those are my 5 core areas that I believe that are the really pinnacle points of the EU AI Act. If we go into the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is the OECD principles on AI, that also covers classifications of AI system. Matter of fact, it's known for hyper-focusing on classification of AI systems if you want to use this principle as guide. And the 5 core areas that I pulled from that, again, that I think are important is inclusive growth, sustainability, development, and well-being. So it's basically, how is that AI system, how is the usability of that tool or that system going to benefit the environment in some way? Of course, it's going to allow you to buy the best toothpaste or direct you to buy the next best technical tool. Of course, it has great marketing capability, but additionally to marketing and sales, how will it benefit the society and world? Will it help streamline education processes? Will help benefit in terms of skill development with your employees or the community at large? Human-centric values and fairness are a pinnacle part of the OECD's principles on AI. They also talk about, and that for them is about human rights. The third is the transparency and explainability. I mentioned all 4 cover transparency because it is very critical. The robustness of the security and safety is going to be the same concept as with the NIST AI RMF. The accountability with organizations, you're going to hear this moving forward: accountability. Organizations and individuals being responsible for AI, whether you are the developer, whether you are the end user, whether you are the consumer, there's going to be some accountability held in all of those domains. It won't just be hyper-focused as we've had in the past with security professionals being, hounded on, well, we're not secure enough. So there's going to be some accountability around these new models, these new systems that are integrating and digesting AI into their models, or language learning models into their systems. machine learning, more of that is coming out in terms of design. How is machine learning going to help streamline your business processes or help identify needs and areas of pain points for you as a professional? The OWASP AI security and privacy guidelines hyper focuses, for me, again, these are the 5 areas that I would definitely hyper focus on, which is data privacy, model security, transparency, and explainability, ethical use, continuous monitoring. And I'm a big proponent on continuous monitoring, especially when we're talking about AI models and that data changes, data drifts. So you definitely want to ensure that there is continuous monitoring as you, again, are deploying those systems, purchasing those systems, however you're using the models or developing them. So the aspect for OWASP is data privacy, ensuring data use and is produced in AI respects. The ethical aspects, of course, is talking about ensuring AI systems are used ethically and does not cause harm. It's going back to all models. So we're going to basically sum this up. I mentioned to you, I think earlier, if I didn't already, I want to ensure that you have kind of a high-level overview of how AI, data, privacy, and governance kind of ties in together, and how really it being a balancing act is a little bit more complex than we'd like it to be, because one, machine learning models are constantly evolving, and not necessarily on their own. We're not talking about that, but the data itself, the machine learning models, the data that's being constantly, the data sets that are being used and ingested in those models, there's a constant learning process, and it's going to always ever be evolving. As long as we, remember, we as humans, we carry the data. We carry the data. So as long as data continuously changes with us, experiences, information, use cases, the security environment, how do we secure an environment with AI being a part of now our malicious ecosystem? How do we secure that? So just basically to wrap everything up, the areas that I really covered to kind of help you balance those core areas, right, is the risk pillars of ISACA. We covered that. And we talked about the risk appetite, the risk tolerance, and the risk capacity. The core risk, which is the AI RMF framework, people, organizations, and the ecosystems, and privacy concerns, basically, and that was to ensure AI systems integrity, security is vital. And remember the frameworks that I mentioned in the previous slide, it's going to cover all of that, particularly when you're talking about privacy concerns and data, sensitive data particularly. Trustworthiness and AI characteristics, the life cycle. What is that, making sure that part of that life cycle is that you're ensuring that there's risk involved in every risk assessing involved in every aspect of that AI life cycle and the stages of that life cycle. The collaboration among stakeholders, also very important to ensure that the development is trustworthy. You have different individuals from different facets of the organization involved to ensure the trustworthiness of the AI system that you're developing. Again, purchasing. I know you guys are going to probably repeat this over after me. If we could do this all together in unison. Developing, purchasing, deploying, right, or using. The trustworthiness of the characteristics of that data or of that system, valid, is it valid, reliability, is it safe, is it secure, who's held accountable if there is a flaw, if something occurs, the accountability of that, the transparency of that, explainability, privacy enhanced, and is it fair? And is it best for your organization? So if you have questions in the chat, please I'll try to get to all of your questions. But before I wrap up, I just want to share with you, I do have a slide deck. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciate your time, appreciate your attention and me listening. Sorry I went so quickly, but I wanted to make sure that I covered at a high level. I do have a slide that it offers you a resource page. And in the chat, what I'll do is I'll add the other two. And if you have any questions, feel free. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, KJ. Great job. Definitely have the contact information out there. Reach out if you have questions that we didn't get answers for you today. KJ, if you wouldn't mind, finish typing out a few of those. We did go a bit long, so out there in the audience, I'm going to direct you guys to kind of finish off any the chats you guys might be doing there. And then we've got another a brief break for you, but then another round of sessions. Check those out. Grab that resource that KJ is going to throw in the chat there. But then we'll see everybody at the next round of sessions. Thank you all again for attending, and we'll see you at the next round. Thank you.
Thanks.